Hi, today I'm sharing the lesson of Jacob with you, and this will be another story in our long kind of season of sharing about Old Testament individuals, starting all the way back in creation and then moving forward toward Abraham, Sarah, Moses, Jacob, Esau, all of these different important people moving right along toward David so that we can pave the way for Advent coming right around the corner. So as I share the story today, do keep in mind that we're back to our regular session schedule, and so the children will be coming in and we'll have the whole worship time with you and the entire service all together. So take your time getting them settled, getting to know them a little bit better, maybe ask questions about their new school year, their new teacher. Some of them have moved to new schools or have just begun school for the first time, so ask a few leading questions, get to know their names, and as they're getting settled in, it's also a good opportunity to remind them of the expectations of the classroom, that there will be a time for them to listen and a time for them to speak. There'll be a time for them to touch the lessons materials and a time for them to let you be the only one to touch them. It helps with the very young children, I think, to even play a couple of games where you play copycat with them to get them settled in and they copy everything that you're doing to make sure that their bodies are under control. Something with the older kids that I just reiterate is that just like at school, there'll be a time for them to participate and a time for them to receive, and that the longer we spend with interruptions or with other things that might get in the way of the lesson telling, the less time we have for them to have independent choice during their worship time. But always getting those kids settled, sitting crisscross, and having their hands under control is a great way to begin. Something I've taken the time to mention in these videos as of late is that regardless what age group you're working with or the different behaviors you might be dealing with, always make sure that the class is calm and attentive before you continue the lesson. There's no point in trying to talk over the children or trying to move past their various interruptions if they're not able to listen, because then a lot of the information will probably be lost and the content won't get through to the kids who are listening. So utilize your doorkeepers, and if there's a student in the circle who just keeps interrupting, keeps touching the story, then invite them to sit with the doorkeeper, and the doorkeeper will help them attend to the story without necessarily being so disruptive. So don't feel that you are not at liberty to do that, because they're still a part of the group. They're just given a little bit of space so that they can listen better and so their classmates can listen better. So I know you're capable and I know that you can do this. So no reason to let behavior issues or interruptions get the better of the lesson. So also, of course, keep in mind that Christine and I are always available to jump in if you need help with anything at all. All right, all that to say, we're back in the Great Green Growing season, of course. So you'll move that arrow up one more box on the circle of the church here, reminding the students that you're moving closer and closer to Advent, and that this Great Green Growing season is a time of learning and finding out more about God's rescue plan. Of course, the part of the culmination of that rescue plan is the genesis of that rescue plan, you might say, is in Jesus' birth. At Christmas, we celebrate that. And so Advent is coming around the corner, but right now we're learning about what the world was like and what was happening in the world before Jesus came. So really solidifying some of these Old Testament stories before we jump into the beginning of the gospel. So as I tell the lesson, this one doesn't have a lot of violence. Sometimes the Old Testament stories can be awfully violent, and so we may modify them a little bit for the younger group, but I don't think this one has much of that, so I won't do much modification. But if there is anything that you're uncomfortable discussing with the children, you can always encourage them to read more in the Bible, to ask their parents more questions. If there's some confusion about Jacob and Leah and Jacob and Rachel's, is it Rachel? Now it slipped my mind. If there's any confusion about Jacob and his two wives, then feel free to remind them. Just like with Abraham and Sarah, that there was a time quite some years ago in which a husband might have more than one wife, and that's not the way it is today, but that sometimes a family would have more than one wife, or multiple family members all living together. So that was a topic during the Abraham, Hagar, Sarah discussion as well. So, okay, thank you for being patient. I'll begin with the lesson, and that's it. Okay, here we go. All right, friends, so here we are. Now, we've learned about Abraham and Sarah. We've learned about Isaac, their son, their special son that they waited and waited and waited for. Well, Isaac grew up and he got married. Isaac had two sons. Does anyone know their name? Jacob, Esau. Jacob and Esau. Now, Jacob's story has something to do with not just what he was like as he got older, but it even has something to do with how he was born. Now, Esau and Jacob were twins, but as you know, or you might know, when twins are born, they're born on the same day, but they can be very different. One is often born a long time before the other. Sometimes if there's a special surgery to help them in the hospital, you might know twins like this. They're born at the exact same moment. But Jacob and Esau were not like that. They were born one just barely in front of the other. So Jacob and Esau, even though they were born the same day, Esau was born first and Jacob was born second. And the story even tells us that Jacob was holding on to the foot of his brother as Esau was born. So Esau was first and Jacob was second. That's important for this story because, as I explained a long time ago, and sometimes even today, the person who was born first gets to be in charge of the whole family after the father dies. So since Esau was born first, that means that when his father Isaac died or couldn't be in charge anymore, then Esau would be in charge, not Jacob, because Jacob was born second. So sometimes you might have heard the word inheritance. Esau had the inheritance first. He was the firstborn son. So that's an important thing to think about because his whole life, Esau knew that he was first and Jacob was second. And his whole life, Jacob knew that he was second and Esau was first. Their daddy was Isaac. Isaac's parents were Abraham and Sarah. So that helps us understand a little bit about how Jacob and Esau were. They were very different, but they were born the same day, and they had the same mommy and the same daddy. Are you ready for our story? This is an important story. We have to be ready. We have to listen. And there will be a time for talking and asking questions, and you may touch the story after you hear me snap, like that. During our worship time, you may touch the story too. This story took place a really long time ago. As you know, so far, God's whole rescue plan, which has really just begun, has already included so many amazing and heroic and surprising people of God. They've done amazing things. Now remember that God promised Abraham that he would be the father of a great big family. But Abraham and Sarah only had one son, Isaac. Isaac married Rebekah. And for a long time, they had no children until, with God's help, they had 2 boys, Jacob and Esau, twins, born the same day. Even though they were twins, they were not like each other. Esau was big and Jacob was small. Esau had red hair and Jacob had dark hair. Esau was hairy. He had hair all over him, big beard. He was hairy, and Jacob was not. He had smooth skin, not a lot of hair on his arms. Esau liked to hunt and to kill animals for eating. And Jacob liked to stay by the tent and take care of the sheep. Esau, like we said, was born first. So he was the one who was supposed to have his father's things when Isaac died. And you know what? Isaac loved Esau the very best. But Rebekah actually loved Jacob the very best. Jacob thought, this isn't fair that Esau is treated special just because he's the oldest, just because he was born first. Why does he have to be treated so special? Remember that jealousy word? We talked about it with Abraham and Sarah. We talked about it with Joseph. We've talked about it a lot. That jealous, icky, awful feeling deep inside when you want what someone else has. Jacob had it too. He was jealous. They'd been born the same day, Jacob thought. Why should Esau be so special? Well, one day, Esau came home from hunting. And as he returned home, he was tired and hungry. So hungry. Crazy hungry. So Jacob made him a bowl of soup. For our story, we have kind of a big bowl. Probably wasn't that big. But this way you can see it. So Jacob made a big bowl of soup for Esau. Esau said, "Hey Jacob, can I have some?" "I will give it to you," said Jacob, "if you agree that I can have Father's things when he dies. If you agree that I can be like the first, then you can have some soup." Sound like a deal? Esau didn't even think about it. "What use are Father's things when I'm hungry?" said Esau. "Okay," said Jacob. So Esau took the soup. Now there was an agreement. They had talked, and they had decided that Jacob would be like the older son now, and Esau wouldn't be hungry, but he would be like the younger son now. They traded places. Now that's sort of strange. They've talked about it, but nobody else was there. As you can imagine, Isaac and Rebekah had gotten quite old. They had lived a long time. Isaac was so old that he couldn't see very well.